listener production.
Hey, welcome back to part 2 of our deep dive into the Macrons versus Candace Owens. I'm Tara Cassidy.
And I'm Helen Smith.
Now, last episode, we got into the history of the conspiracy theory about Brigitte Macron and where allegations of her being born a man first began, as well as the previous lawsuits. While today, we're going to unpack the actual defamation case brought against Candace, which was filed just over 2 weeks ago. France's first couple, President Emmanuel Macron and his wife Brigitte Macron, filed it after Candace Owens claimed to her millions of followers and viewers that Brigitte was born a man.
I would stake my entire professional career on the fact that Brigitte Macron, the current First Lady of France, was born a man.
Before releasing an 8-part YouTube and podcast series called Becoming Brigitte, where she claims to be investigating and proving that claim.
Receiving a legal letter from a sitting president of a foreign country is extraordinary. So extraordinary that it may have never happened before in human history, okay? A year ago when I said that I would stake my entire professional career on the fact that Brigitte Macron, the current First Lady of France, was born a man, there were many people, of course, who did not believe me because that just sounds crazy.
Candace also makes a number of other claims on her podcast and in various interviews and ex-posts since, that the Macrons are part of a, quote, very small group of elite oligarchs who routinely practice homosexuality and pedophilia, believe in Baphomet, which is a goat figure associated with cults, and of worshipping a transgender deity that controls the world. Yep, that's literally in the court document. She also claims that Brigitte stole another person's identity, that the Macrons committed incest, and there's more, that President Macron was chosen to be the president of France as part of the CIA-operated MK-Ultra program or a similar mind control program.
There is no conspiracy here. The MK-Ultra was real. The government was obsessed with all of these different programs. So they would experiment psychologically through isolation, through drugs, to see if they could get them to commit crimes or to commit other acts unwittingly. One element of that program was, of course, sexual perversions, like committing sexual assaults in order to then establish how it impacts somebody's psyche. Truly evil stuff, okay? Now, earlier, I told you that Macron's alleged biological parents had some interesting jobs just off the bat. His father, Jean-Michel Macron, was a psychiatrist. And yes, of course, we know for a fact that psychiatrists have done some evil things, some very evil things throughout the years.
And she's also accused Mrs. Macron and President Macron of committing forgery, fraud, and abuses of power to conceal these secrets.
Now, Macron's lawyers say Candace has spread these verifiably false and devastating lies, and when they repeatedly requested Candace retract her comments, instead of doing so, she called out the audacity of the Macrons to ask her to retract the statement. She stuck to her claims and even doubled down on them further and has continued to discuss them on various platforms since. Now, in this lawsuit, the Macrons' lawyers say Candace is doing this only to promote herself and get notoriety and money, basically, saying she did this, quote, not in pursuit of the truth, but in the pursuit of fame, and that any credible evidence given to Candace, she just disregards it, shoots it down in favour of peddling conspiracy theories and defamatory statements to all of her frenzied fan base. Now, the Macrons are really hoping that the defamation case will set the record straight once and for all. Now, I have read this court document that lays out the lawsuit. It is 219 pages and it starts right at the beginning. It lays out the Macrons' early life, Emmanuel as a young boy, and how he met Brigitte when attending high school, where Brigitte was his French and drama teacher, how they struck up a relationship over their, quote, passion for literature and theatre when Emmanuel was just 15, and Brigitte over 20 years his senior, which we discussed last episode. And it goes on to talk about Brigitte, where and when she was born as a woman, talks about her life and supplies a few photos, including a birth announcement, a family photo, and Brigitte at her first wedding.
Yeah, and Candace claims that these are all fake. And the doc elaborates about where this theory about Brigitte began, which we also discussed in Ep 1. Then it gets into Candace, lays out her journey from being an intern at Vogue and then, surprisingly, working for a progressive, anti-conservative, anti-Trump publication before, in 2016, launching an anti-online harassment website. Her flipping sides and becoming a Trump supporter, then continuing on her right-wing trajectory, she became known for the Blexit movement, encouraging Black Americans to leave the Democratic Party. She launches The Candace Owens Show, a video podcast on YouTube, interviewing conservative figures. It then describes how she started delving into French far-right politics, would criticise Emmanuel Macron, and basically how we got to where we are now, where she's being sued for defamation by France's first couple.
So what are they arguing and what do they have to prove? Well, defamation in America is very different to in other parts of the world. They have different laws around freedom of speech, and to successfully sue someone who is a public figure or a politician, member of the media, it's even more difficult because of these free speech laws and because there's an even higher threshold. And what it will basically come down to is proving malice. And to prove malice in this instance, the Macron's lawyers will have to prove that Candace, when making these claims on her podcast and YouTube series and on X, knew what she was saying was not true, or that she acted with a reckless disregard for whether it was true or false, beyond just negligence or carelessness.
And in the court documents, there are many areas where they lay out examples of what they say are clear demonstrations of this. One is that pre-publishing this series, the Macrons sent Candace a retraction request. In it, they claimed they provided various pieces of evidence, including images, dates, outlined how journalists had met with Brigitte Macron's brother, who explained they are not the same person, and that they very clearly and outright denied that Brigitte was born a man.
Now, that part I find interesting because this is something that Candace has gone on and on about, repeated countless times on her podcast, on the Tucker Carlson show, that the Macrons have never blatantly denied Brigitte was born a man. Rather, she says that they just dance around the topic.
Now, if I'm the president and I'm dealing with a 10-year issue of people saying that my wife has a penis and I could just very easily debunk this, I'm sure as hell not going to pay lawyers overseas to send legal threats and legal letters that say, oh, okay, well, we're not going to answer the question, but we are going to send you a 100-page letter. Wouldn't you just answer the question at a certain point?
She says that instead of answering her direct questions, the Macrons have only ever said in a legal letter to her that, quote, Mrs. Macron does not owe you proof that she is and always has been a woman because, frankly, it is none of your business. And since the lawsuit was filed, Candace has again denied that they've ever flatly denied Brigitte was born a man. And she said it again on Tucker Carlson. But in that lawsuit document, which I've read, it says it very clearly, many times. Brigitte Macron was born a woman, 19 times to be exact. So her saying that they have never blatantly denied it is just definitely false.
Yeah, and I can second that. I also read it in the lawsuit as well. And that was just one example of what they say proves her malice. Another was them saying that when she did in fact receive proof and their denial, she simply just ignores it and continues to reject it and call it fake.
Yeah, and they also argue that Candace Owens misled her audience when claiming that the Macrons, even trying to sue her, proves her argument.
They want the world to believe that she has a claim against me, that, we're suing, therefore, because this podcaster lied. It was a mistake because obviously now people are going, okay, something must be true. A president of a foreign country does not sue a mom that does her podcast in her basement because she spoke something that was not true. Like, there's clearly something that they want hidden.
Now, just quickly, the point Candace made there about being some random mum in her basement, suggesting as if she's just some nobody with no influence, why would anyone care what she says? I think it's important to note that she has a huge amount of influence. She is one of the biggest podcasters in the United States, arguably the world. She has millions of followers across her accounts. On X alone, 6.9 million, YouTube, 4.4 million subscribers, Instagram 5.6 million. And she's very well resourced, has a whole team of lawyers, producers, even private investigators and other powerful contacts. So just some added context there.
Now, the Macrons' lawyers also say she hasn't been honest with her audience or let them know that the Macrons did address her questions. Rather, they claim she just ignored it, denies it, and then goes as far to admit that she initially planned to only release one episode on Brigitte Macron, but after getting the retraction, decided to double down and make a whole series of it.
Because I was only going to do one episode, and I said, now we're doing a whole series, because how dare you?
Now, Candace says that the reason she's doubling down is because, in her opinion, there hasn't been any irrefutable evidence to prove her claims wrong, and she wants harder proof.
Yeah, but just to make one other point there, in journalism, it is not a person's responsibility to prove that a journalist's claims are wrong before that journalist has first provided concrete evidence of what they're saying. That's not how it works. And so far, Candace hasn't done that. What she has done is speculate and offer up a theory based around information from other people, other publications that align with her view. She's scrutinised photos, suggesting they've been manipulated. She's pointed out a lack of photos from Brigitte's life. She talks about an old TV interview where a woman has similar language and voice patterns to Brigitte, but none of that is hard, verified evidence. So the suggestion that it's the Macron's duty to prove her claims wrong is not correct. Candace is yet to even prove it's true to start with. Now, finally, the lawsuit also suggests that Candace having a financial incentive to make the defamatory accusations further proves actual malice as well.
Now, that doubling down we mentioned earlier, that is one part that they will likely use when they try to push for punitive damages, so money that's awarded to further punish a defendant. That behaviour someone takes after the fact to further persuade others of what they've said. So after Candace first claimed Brigitte was born a man, after she was sued, her continuing to argue her stance, saying, well, we were doing one episode, now we're doing a full series, and her claim saying, I'd bet my whole career on the fact Brigitte is a man, they might argue that in those instances she was doing just that, trying to further persuade people of her claims. And if they are able to prove that, it can be very costly. There's a more recent example of when this was awarded, and it was when US conspiracy theorist Alex Jones falsely claimed that the 2012 Connecticut school shooting, which killed 27 people and the shooter, was a hoax. The Sandy Hook family sued Alex Jones, and he was ordered to pay nearly $1 billion in punitive damages. $1 billion. And part of the argument was not just him making that claim to begin with, but when he doubled down further after.
So two parts to this basically. Malice, which can be quite difficult to prove, and then possibly punitive damages. And I guess it will just come down to that argument over truth, Helen. Is the evidence the Macrons provided enough proof of the truth in the court's eyes? Will they have to prove even further than that or demonstrate that those documents are legitimate? Because to prove malice or that reckless disregard for the truth, they need to be able to demonstrate that Candace ignored the truth and didn't care what she was saying and that it was a lie. So it will be very interesting to see what happens. And like us, the eyes of the world are going to be watching on to see the outcome with wide-reaching repercussions, whichever way it goes.
Yes, it will. And now that brings our two-part deep dive into the Macrons versus Candace Owens to a close. There was a lot to unpack there. Thanks for joining us. But that's it for this episode of The Briefing. If you found this ep interesting, don't forget to leave a comment or review, or you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Helen Smith.
And I'm Tara Cassidy. See you next time.